not to be flippant, but it's like, if you don't have haters, then you're not doing it right. Like, if the NRA is not hating what we're doing, then we're probably not doing enough.
We got to address the suburban women problem because it's real.
Welcome to the Suburban Women Problem, a podcast for Red, Wine, and Blue.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jasmine Clark.
I'm Rachel Vindman.
I'm Amanda Weinstein.
And you're listening to the Suburban Women Problem. This week, we're celebrating Juneteenth. I'll get to share my interview with Jo Banner, who founded the Descendants Project along with her twin sister, Joy. It was so interesting talking to her about the Descendants Project. It's in Louisiana, and she talks about how she basically left Louisiana, went off to college, but she came back because it was just she was drawn to that community, and she just has such strong ties to her community. So it was a really, really interesting interview. And before that, we'll be joined by Meredith Lawson-Rowe, a city councilwoman in Ohio who's organized Juneteenth celebrations in her town. But first, let's start, as always, with a check-in. So how are y'all doing, and what's been blowing up our group chat?
Oh, man, there's a lot going on. I mean, first, I would like to talk about your tweet, Jasmine, about what the federal government plans to do on guns, because I thought you had the perfect statement on this, that yes, what they're doing is important, right? Getting to red flag laws that allows judges to take guns away from people who are a threat to themselves and others, broadening what we consider, domestic violence offenders to include boyfriends, right? All of these things are very important and very historic. And what you said was, and we need to do more.
Exactly.
Both can be true.
Yeah, I think, sometimes it's easy to see what's missing. It's easy to see the parts that you wanted that aren't there without acknowledging the parts that you wanted that are. And so I think it's very important that we just acknowledge that, number one, it's taken almost 3 decades to even get this much done. And while I do feel it is a bit inadequate in that we need a whole lot more, I will not poo-poo this moment.
No.
But just like with anything, an object in motion stays in motion.
Yes.
And so this is the motion that we need to keep the ball rolling. But the ball does not roll until there is something that pushes it. This is that push. So I get it. I get people who are like, I'm angry that there's not a full weapons ban, or, I get that. I understand people's angst, anxiety, disappointment. I get all of those things, but we cannot make perfect the enemy of good in every situation. And we have to celebrate our small victories.
The ball was not rolling.
Yes.
We all know that. The ball was not rolling before. So that push is really important. And when we talk about common sense gun laws, even reading it, you're like, that's not already a thing.
Yeah, I know. When you're reading it, you're like, oh, wow. But I count it a victory that there are so many opponents even to these laws. Not because I'm happy because they're upset. That's not what I mean. But they're upset because they if they didn't matter, then people wouldn't be upset about it. So closing some of the loopholes, the red flag laws, especially for domestic violence and including boyfriends, those are big deals. And that is really, they wouldn't be fighting it if what didn't bother them.
Yeah. Such a good point, Rachel. It's almost like, not to be flippant, but it's like, if you don't have haters, then you're not doing it right. Like, if the NRA is not hating what we're doing, then we're probably not doing enough. So the fact that the NRA is like, whoa, stop the presses, stop doing this, we don't even want that, that at least lets us know that we're going in the right direction. Because honestly, if the NRA is on your bad side, you are doing it right.
I think taking one step, getting that ball rolling, whatever you want the analogy to be, that's also their problem.
Yep.
Because they know they can make it scary when there's nothing, but when we start doing something, and guess what? The world doesn't stop turning and everything doesn't grind to a halt. Or maybe, what if we have less gun violence when we have these laws?
Right.
Then maybe we should have more That's what they really ultimately are fighting against. That's what they never want you to do, is take the first step. And here we are. So I think that's good. And personally, even though I don't have anyone in this age group, I was also super excited this week to hear about the vaccine for the littles. They certainly took their time because this was the last age group and we have so many people protected. They really took time, like making sure the dosage is right. And it's a lot different than the schedules. What is the schedule? Do you know what it is?
Yeah, so I know it depends on the brand. So one, it's actually 3 shots. And I think there's another brand where it's 2 shots. And it's something like every 4 weeks. So it's different. It's not the same as the adult one.
And I think, to your point, Rachel, the fact that they took the time to really do this research and to go through the trials and to not rush it, because I think there was a push to hurry up. And I get that because everyone else had been vaccinated. So people were like, what is taking so long to get this vaccine for these little kids?
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. If I had little kids, I would have been one of those people.
Sure. Yeah,
but
course,
I think that they said, there's a way to do this and there's a way to do this right. And we're going to do it right. And so I hope it gives those who are interested in vaccinating their little kids, the ones who were not eligible and are finally eligible, I hope it gives them a bit more peace of mind, especially as people are getting on planes and they're traveling and there's no mask mandates. We really were leaving the youngest of us the most vulnerable and kind of just being like, every man for himself, like, you figure it out.
Even Ron DeSantis is on board now because at first he was the only governor.
Didn't they forget to order it for their young kids or something?
I don't think they forgot.
Oh, no, he didn't forget. He refused.
They refused to order it.
So much for medical choice. Like, hey, you want medical choice whether or not to vaccinate? Guess what? We're going to take it away from you and not order it for you and your kids. So that's really what they think of medical choice.
No, he was making the choice for them about what they could do.
So I think we also need to talk about Red, White, and Blue founder Katie Paris. So she recently went and confronted Betsy DeVos publicly about the way we tried to enforce a trans ban for sports by enforcing internal and external genital checks for kids to play soccer. And Betsy DeVos was like, oh, I'm not going to answer that question.
Yeah, she was like, oh.
She's like, I'm going to pass that to someone else because that one sounds bad.
I'm not surprised.
No. So so Betsy definitely passed it to our Senate President, Matt Huffman, who was like, okay, we're not going to do the genital checks anymore. Like, that's bad. We're going to take that out. Right. So here's where the and comes in is right. That's amazing that they're taking this out and that Katie Paris, through her question, got them to officially state we are taking that out of this bill. That is amazing. She did that. And the and we need to do more. I mean, they're still going to do a trans ban and they're still going to pick on trans children. Like, literally, we're talking about 10-year-olds playing soccer here. Like, maybe we have more important things to do in Ohio.
They pass these laws not even thinking, because they never think it's going to be them. They never think they're going to be subject to these laws because they don't care what the hell they say.
Right.
Because they think it will never, ever affect them. So they think they can do whatever they want.
No, it's clickbait politics. Like, it's the same thing with an article. It's like, what could be a clickbait bill? It's a clickbait bill.
Yeah, it is. It totally is.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's good. Good point.
That's a perfect description. And but it's all fun and games till you have to actually live under those laws.
Right.
There's always second order effects. Like, I feel like Republicans used to know this, where they would complain about these second order effects and the unintended consequences of government doing this much. They are literally like the party of unintended consequences right now.
Can I just, so my favorite from the hearing on Thursday, I can't quit quoting this. I actually did a tweet about it with a picture of Ace, our dog, when a few weeks ago he got into the trash, but a few months ago. But my favorite quote from the hearing was from John Eastman. I think I should be on the pardon list if that's still in the works. And I just think about that all. I go through my whole life without ever thinking I have to be on the pardon list,
right,
for anything. Who says that? Only people who are criming. Only people who go out, they do whatever they want with abandon. They don't care about the consequences until they think they might get caught, or they won't have the cover from the White House or whatever. And then they're like, so maybe I need a pardon.
At least he was smart enough to think he needs a pardon. Jim Jordan's like, there's nothing new I learned about here. And everyone's like, that's bad.
Yeah.
They are revealing stuff that supposedly you guys didn't know and organize. But when you're stating outright, like, we all knew about this, you're stating this was all part of the Republican plan. Like, Jim Jordan, you should be asking for a pardon right now. He's not even asking for it.
Yes, exactly.
Really lucky that these are the dumbest coup plotters in the history of the world, but really don't want to give them a second chance.
Right. But, little pivot. This weekend, we just celebrated Juneteenth. And, it was technically the second year since it's been a federal holiday. And so I'm really excited that a lot more communities got involved.
Mm-hmm.
And so to give everyone a little bit of background on Juneteenth, Juneteenth is considered the longest running African American holiday, and it commemorates the end of slavery, but not the way you might think. Whereas most people think of the Emancipation Proclamation, which was signed in 1863, as the end of slavery, the important thing to note is that emancipation actually came at different times in different places in the United States. And in particular, in Galveston, Texas, it wasn't until June 19th, 1865, that troops arrived there and announced that all the enslaved Black people in Texas were free. And so they kind of shortened the name from June 19th to Juneteenth. And that is what we are now celebrating. It is now officially a federal holiday. And, more and more people are starting to learn about this. I appreciate it, especially in the context of all the things that they're trying to take, all the history that they're trying to take out of the classroom. I am glad that this is something they can't take from us because now it is an official holiday. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Did y'all do anything for Juneteenth?
So we have in Cuyahoga Falls, we had a very nice reverent, I wouldn't call it a celebration. It's more like an acknowledgement of the history of what Juneteenth is and the town's connection to it and learning about families that live there. And I always find this fascinating because I feel part of what we lose in our history is who we are, who all of us are. And I feel we haven't done the same thing like Germany. When you walk through Germany and you see the little stones and you see the names of families that were there, we don't have that in the US. And even here, like I live within walking distance of, stops that used to be stops on the Underground Railroad, but I don't know what houses there are. There's nothing that marks it. And I feel like it is this forgotten history and we don't know our place in history and don't know the true history because we just haven't remembered it the way that other places have remembered their history.
In Georgia, celebrating Juneteenth was not a big thing. So in Texas, it's been celebrated for a while, but in Georgia, it wasn't something we talked about in school. It's not something I really learned about in my history books.
I didn't know about it.
And so I really started learning about Juneteenth maybe about a decade ago. And that was just through me having conversations with other people, but I didn't really know about I can genuinely say I was not taught about Juneteenth. So when did you guys learn about it?
I feel like just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, just a couple of years ago. Amanda, when you compare it to Germany, there's a lot of pressure on the Germans from the entire world to not forget what happened during the Shoah or the Holocaust. But I think that we don't have that.
Like you said, there's tremendous pressure for Germany to basically right the wrong that was Nazism and Hitler. Hitler is a pariah. He is not someone that is celebrated. Now come to the United States. Slavery is not something that the world, even if they're like, yeah, that was a bad part of y'all's history, but everything's good now. The people who were involved, the people at the top, the generals, they didn't become pariahs. They became heroes.
Still have their statues.
Yeah. And I think so to your point, there's really no incentive to talk about what happened and the wrongs and the ugly parts of our history, because there are some people that don't see it as ugly. because the streets are named after generals, the schools are named after generals, there's statues. So clearly this couldn't have been that bad because, I mean, like there's statues and road signs and bridges and everything named after these people.
And I do think there's something every community can do. Like, could we have, in my community, couldn't we get in Ohio a stone at every single home that was a stop on the Underground Railroad? Something that makes you stop and say, at some point, we fought against this. We were actively doing something to make the world better. Like, this is part of who we are. We should continue being this part.
That's why I do think that, recognizing Juneteenth and in any way, just, acknowledging it in communities that acknowledge it with the celebration is also really special.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note of acknowledging Juneteenth, today we're bringing back a guest we had on the podcast almost a year ago. Meredith is a suburban mom in Reynoldsburg, Ohio, who won her local race for city council. For the past couple of years, Meredith has organized a Juneteenth celebration in her town. Meredith, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. It's a privilege.
We had you on the show last year to talk about your run for city council. And then I actually got a chance to meet you in person here in Georgia. That was awesome. Thanks for coming to visit me. So how are you and how are things in Reynoldsburg?
I'm doing awesome. Things are going well in Reynoldsburg. We just celebrated our third annual Reynoldsburg Juneteenth. So I'm just now at the point where I can exhale after all of the excitement.
That's so cool. We went to a Juneteenth festival this year as well. And I think it's just different now because now like more people are aware of Juneteenth. We had been having them all this time, but now it's more of like more people are like, oh, I want to be involved in this. And, it was a different atmosphere, but it was great. I really enjoyed it.
Same. And I think more of the media is picking up these stories too, and they're covering these celebrations where they weren't before.
Juneteenth is a celebration that's very near and dear to my heart. And so when I was elected in 2019, I wanted to do something for Juneteenth in 2020, but the world stopped. Thanks, COVID. And so in terms of us having a large celebration, I was encouraged by our mayor to still plan something after I asked him to write a proclamation recognizing Juneteenth in the city of Reynoldsburg. So long story short, in about 10 days or less, I planned a small celebration on the steps of City Hall. And it was so meaningful because even though we were in the middle of a pandemic, neighbors still had come out in order to commemorate the end of slavery. It was very important to me that we focus on the historical context of it all, as well as a celebration. So last year in 21, even though we were still in a pandemic, we were able to have a small festival like outside as our celebration. And we had vendors and food trucks and speakers, and it was just a grand time.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Meredith, why is it important to you to celebrate and acknowledge Juneteenth?
I think it benefits us because, first of all, we're having a conversation. We're talking about our history. So much of our history is not shared in public schools. For instance, my mom is from Texas. I didn't know about Juneteenth until I went to college. So it's important to me that I have grandchildren and they know what Juneteenth is. And they know that it's a celebration. They know that it's Emancipation Day. They know it's a commemoration of the end of slavery. My hope is that we will continue talking about accurate history in the United States, because if we don't talk about accurate history, whenever someone decides they want to tell a half truth of the history, then things get misconstrued.
So Meredith, like you've had the opportunity to organize this. And as you said, it started out as just like a little gathering at City Hall. And now it's grown into what you just had this past weekend. And so maybe there's other people out there that, are like, I would love to also put together some type of Juneteenth celebration for my community, because we didn't do it this year, but I really want to, experience this for my community. What advice would you give to that person that's like, how do I go about organizing a Juneteenth celebration for my community?
Juneteenth can be as elaborate or as simple as you would like it. Juneteenth is celebrated in many different ways throughout communities right here in Central Ohio and in the nation. And it's community-centric events. So it could be a cookout, it could be a parade, it could be cultural readings, spoken word, prayer gatherings, concerts. So whatever is most appropriate for your community, your creativity actually is the one that would limit whatever your options are to celebrate Juneteenth.
You know, Meredith, I'm so happy that we celebrate and talk about this now, because I think it's a real, especially in this moment that we're in with the critical race theory nonsense and other things. It gives us a real chance. For me, as a mom of an 11-year-old, she's actually at camp now, but we were able to discuss before she left, we were able to talk about Juneteenth, and I think we saw a sign or something for an upcoming celebration. And we have to acknowledge the bad parts of our history so we can move beyond them. So I just thank you for your efforts and what you're doing, because unless we have these conversations and admit where we were wrong to try to move past it, just papering over it and not talking about it is not going to get us anywhere.
Right. Giving context to the history and just letting people know, like, there's history, there's good and there's bad, but we acknowledge it all. So Meredith, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to have you on the pod.
Well, thank you so much. It's such an honor and a privilege. Thank you. I appreciate everything you guys do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have my conversation with Jo Banner of the Descendants Project.
There is a lot for suburban women to stand up against right now. Between gun violence, abortion restrictions, book bans, and everything else, it can feel overwhelming. But if we all join together, we can make a difference. Red, Wine, and Blue has launched the Great Troublemaker Turnout, and we need you to join us. Talking to the people in your own network is the most effective way to influence voters, and we are here to help you tap into your superpower. You can sign up for the Great Troublemaker Turnout by going to theswppod.com or at the link in the show notes.
Our guest today founded a nonprofit along with her twin sister called the Descendants Project. Their organization is dedicated to uplifting and protecting the descendants of enslaved people in Louisiana River parishes. Jo Banner, welcome to the Suburban Women Problem.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So very exciting. This week we are celebrating Juneteenth. And there are a lot of people that are just now learning about Juneteenth. I think it's one of those holidays that has not really been known across the country until very recently. So could you tell our listeners about the history of Juneteenth and specifically what it means to you?
Well, the Juneteenth started in Galveston in Texas. So it's a holiday that memorializes when the Galveston enslaved realized they were actually free. And so they had that celebration. It's funny because this is an event that's really it's really specific to Galveston, but it's something that's happened all around the country. So we've kind of like adopted this event to remember all of our liberation time. So yeah, I think Louisiana's one actually happened in July, the beginning of July. So yeah, we just I think that it's an important holiday. It's good that it's getting recognition by the country so that we all can think about we think about slavery a lot, but it's also good that we think about when we were actually free. At least I think about slavery a lot because where I'm at in Louisiana and what I do, it's a big focal point. But it's also good to remember the moments of freedom and joy that we've had, even under such heavy circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually really happy as well that as a country, we are acknowledging that this happened and honestly informing and educating people about it. Because I mean, people just didn't even know about this. This is like something that people are finding out about in 2021 and in 2022. And like, there's a lot of people that are still not quite sure what Juneteenth is. And, you know, it's a horrible thing, but I think this is an opportunity to educate.
Right. And it's something that we, it can be, it's good that so many people are getting attention to it. I'm a little shocked at the commercialization of it so quickly.
Agree.
And I'm sure,
yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of what happens. But at least the message is getting out.
Right. Yeah, I think the commercialization just comes from the fact that our consumerist capitalist economy will find a way to make money off of literally everything.
Right.
All right. So you grew up in Wallace, Louisiana, and like a lot of your neighbors, you can trace your ancestry back to the people who were enslaved in the local plantations. So you and your sister, Joy, both left Wallace for school, but then you both came back again. So why was it important for you all to come back to your hometown?
I think it was important because my parents too, but we spent a lot of time with our grandparents. Speaking of we, because I have an identical twin, so let me just warn you: if you see me, we or us, it's because of Joy is always with me. Yeah, but our grandparents took care of us. We're our babysitters as our parents worked, and every day, essentially, we learned amazing history about the area. And it was so multi-dimensional. We could be talking about plantations, or we could be talking about gardening, or we could be talking about folk tales, or the river, or, you know, fishing or hunting or cooking. So they just gave us this wonderful view, a 360 view of what our community was like, and also our heritage and our place and rootedness in the community.
Right.
So we grew up with a love of it and seeing so much potential. So it was just, I fell in love from a very young age with the community and the history. And I'm so thankful my grandparents instilled that into us. And for me, it wasn't a decision. It was like, I'm always going to be here. And I wanted to really give back to my community and protect what we have.
I love that. All right. So you also went on to found your nonprofit, the Descendants Project. So what led to your founding of this organization?
I have been in the tourism industry for over 20 years. I worked for plantations as a tour guide. And then I also worked for a tourist commission in an area that is all about plantation tourism. So working in this field for all of that time, it started to really bother me, that I did not see descendants of the enslaved represented. Let me say, not represented, but asked how we want to be represented, right?
Gotcha.
So we didn't know exactly how. No one was checking in with us to say, okay, this is your history.
Right.
In addition to that, I was tired of bits and bytes of our history being removed and then placed in a narrative where it was convenient and sanitized and comfortable. So like, we'll talk about slavery, but only after it, if we can do it in a way that doesn't hurt the enslaving family. It's all of these hoops you have to jump through in order to get our history presented. And that's not what the truth is, right? It's all about just unfiltered facts. So I saw that happening time and time again. What I really wanted was a way to have input in our own history and our culture to be recognized, and for descendants of the enslaved to have a fair participation in an economy that's based in the tourism industry. So that's what we started off with, redefining us. Louisiana loves to call our area plantation country. The tourist commission that I worked for, the marketing moniker that they used was New Orleans plantation country, which was a double kind of insult because we're not New Orleans. And I mean, what plantation country is not a way to define yourself. It's just really insensitive. So we wanted to change that. Like Joy and I, for example, was tired of trying to put myself in this bubble and ignoring all the other parts of me and only being accepted for this one appropriate look or one appropriate presentation. We wanted to have freedom in that. So what we did was we started the Descendants Project in order to give more facts, give more information, talk about things that exist outside the plantation, off the plantation, such as the folk tales and other landscapes. Not that they weren't connected to the plantations, but just trying to be more than one thing, trying to be defined as one thing. So that's why we started the Descendants Project. And then we had thankfully, not say thankfully, but now I am thankful that we're more into environmental justice and stopping heavy industry from continuing to encroach in our area.
So speaking of, that actually brings me to my next question, because your region is unfortunately known as Cancer Alley. And that's because of the toxic petrochemical plants that have popped up in the area. And it's just another glaring example that even generations after slavery was abolished, Black lives are still being disregarded, just in a different way. So, like, what are the connections that you see between slavery and the current treatment of Black communities in Louisiana and maybe just across the country?
Well, what we're seeing is just a lack of concern for Black bodies, a lack of concern for us, even sometimes not even seeing us, like being seen and not being seen at the same time, which I think is something that many people of color, especially Black people, have to navigate. So, like for us, we're battling this grain elevator that's trying to locate into our area, despite the fact that the zoning for the land is incorrect. We've gone through the law, we've seen the maps, we've seen all of this stuff. And still this company is trying to tell us, no, we're right. We're going to come next to you. We don't care what the law says. There are no rules when it comes to us. You have rules, but we don't have rules. And what is that if not slavery? That we can't even build our homes, raise our families without somebody coming in next to us and saying, you can't live here anymore, or you don't have the right to clean air, to clean water, to clean soil. Because economically it's what benefits us.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people make those connections. I recently looked at a map that shows kind of like the economic conditions now versus the economic conditions during redlining, where they basically designated certain communities of color, Black communities, and said, those people are dispensable. We can do whatever we want. Could you tell us more about the work that your organization does to fight for the people in your community?
Well, one thing that we're doing, and it does tie into the grain elevator, but it's what we're trying to impress on other people, is that we're talking about zoning, but there's so many different ways that zoning could hurt you or help you. So we have to get familiar with that. Maybe it's not as sexy as maybe marching or what have you, but like it's really, we got to start going to meetings and protesting by using the law and using those 2 or 3 minutes of public comment that we have and pushing back on those systems. What we're doing to piggyback off that is just to make our community aware of all these different routes that we can be suppressed, that government is participating in many ways and holding us back or keeping us away from information. So it's just awareness is one. We have made a campaign. We haven't officially launched it, but we will in the next few days, called Hands of the People Empowered or Hope. And the main focus of that campaign will be educating in our community about Freedom of Information Act request, how a public meeting agenda should go out. Is it being advertised in the right, the journal of choice that's on record? All of these ways, these things, we have to understand it. And when someone tries to shut us down, we can say, no, well, look, this is a request that I had. You have 3 days to give a response to me. I haven't heard from you. We can take on these tools to at least start fighting back. And when they aren't answering, getting legal help, getting attorneys involved, and putting pressure on them from that way.
I love that. I love something that you said. So when you're talking about things like zoning, or when you're talking about things like meeting agendas, yeah, it's not the most sexy thing, but sometimes the least sexiest thing is one of the most important things that you really need to know. They don't package those things in sexy packages. They make it really unattractive so you don't pay attention. What do you wish that our listeners knew about slavery and the effects that the descendants of enslaved people are still feeling to this day?
There are two parts to slavery. There's actual enslavement, and then there is a system of slavery. You can still have the system of slavery without actual enslavement.
Absolutely.
So that is what I have understood was happening now. So many ways I'm going, and it's like, this is plantation politics. Seeing it and exposing it is scary to the people who are uplifting that system. And when you start digging at that, that's what really will rile them up. Anyone who's trying, when you start exposing that. So what we are doing now is pulling that system apart piece by piece as best that we could. So that's what I want everyone to understand. It's so scary, deep-seated. It's so hard to see sometimes. That's the thing. Sometimes it can be so obvious, but sometimes it's just so, like, you just see a little hint of something and you're like, wait a second, was that slavery? But, or a system? And you don't know, it's like, or was it just a look or something like that? But it makes me think of, so we deal with some of the plantations, and some of the plantations, we have like Whitney. Whitney really has this mission of Whitney Plantation where they are honoring the enslaved, talking about the enslaved, being a slavery museum. But then you have other plantations that realize, okay, well, we can't get away with not addressing slavery. So we're going to make it look like we're really addressing this issue. And it looks like a good thing, but it makes it more difficult to see them. It makes it more difficult when they can add a couple elements to their tour and then highlight it and say, you see, we're equal, we're doing this, and we're changed. And they really haven't, because that management is the same. They're still marketing as a bachelorette party, or they're still doing those different things.
Right.
They haven't really had that monumental change that's needed. They're just perpetrating a lie. And then we are left, as Black people, we're the ones left to figure it out.
Right. Yeah, no, I completely understand. And then you add on to the fact that now state after state, including the state where I live in Georgia, we can't even teach about it in the classrooms because it's going to make someone feel bad. So, that in and of itself, I would say, is a system. That is a system that is meant to erase or deny people their history. I could go on and on about that.
Well, slavery is an economic system. It's how can you not talk about steel when you talk about America?
Right.
How can you not talk about your banking systems and all of that? Slavery was an economic system, agriculture. How do you talk about that without talking about slavery?
Exactly.
If you want to take it away from the black and white, what about the green of it all?
Right.
You have to talk about that part of it too. That's just what the country is made of.
Absolutely. I am 100% with you on that. All right. So now we are going to switch to my favorite part of the show. And this is where we like to ask our guests a few rapid fire questions. So are you ready?
Sure, I am.
All right. So what's the best thing about Wallace?
The best thing about Wallace is our community. It's just a connection to everything. I feel like the rootedness of our community is so deep and spiritual.
I love that. All right. Next question. If you could be a guest star on any TV show, what would it be?
What would it be? A guest star, any TV show? Oh my goodness. I guess maybe anything with Jason Momoa on it.
Yeah, I love that. It's like, I don't even care what the show is. I just want to be on it with him.
Yeah, really?
Yeah, I'm with you there. So what's your favorite thing about being a twin?
My favorite thing is just having someone that gets me all the time. I'm a pretty weird person. When you're from Louisiana, that's like a 50-50 chance that you're going to come out weird. And we got... And I definitely got that weirdness, Louisiana weirdness to it. And so we're good having someone who really gets me and we get each other with that and supports me when I have a crazy thought like, how about we start a nonprofit and we do this on our own? And and have that person there to support.
I love that. I don't have a twin. I do have a sibling, but I don't have a twin. But I've always heard that having a twin is like really cool. So you also own a restaurant in Wallace called the Fee Fo Lay Cafe. So what's your favorite dish on the menu?
My favorite dish are, we call them tea cakes or petit gâteaux, which are there. It's a sugar cookie-like dessert, but soft, and it has almond flavoring and buttercream. icing that I use, but it's a recipe that's handed down from my great great grandmother. So it's been in our family for over about 150 years at this point.
Oh, wow.
And they're just my favorite thing in the world are tea cakes. And like I've been making them for years and I got it just right. I think now they've been good for long, but now I just got them perfectly to the way I like them, what other people like. So that will always be my favorite.
So what do you do for self-care?
I ride my bike.
Oh,
I
nice.
love riding a bike. I love riding on the levee, which is I live right next to. So yeah, a bike ride is my therapy in a lot of evenings when I need to decompress. If I can get on the levee and take a bike ride that's not so brutally hot, it's perfect.
It's really hot here. I don't know if I can barely like walk to my mailbox without sweating.
I mean,
So that is actually the end of our rapid fire questions. And so can you let our listeners know where they can go to find out more about you and your work?
sure, you can go on social media like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at the Descendants Project. We also have a website that you can subscribe to our newsletter. It's a good way to keep up with our updates. We often ask for just comments from the public when we are fighting these different permits. And so having a signature on the petition means the world to us. So yeah, if we can, that would mean just everything, just having more people subscribe and follow us and chime in when necessary.
Awesome. Well, Jo, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been great talking to you, and we appreciate you stopping by on the Suburban Women Problem.
All right. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Welcome back, everyone. Jasmine, one of the most compelling parts of the interview, which I loved, was talking about the plantations. And I think this is something for me, I watched the miniseries The North and South growing up. Like I didn't even think about, even if you watch those, the shows, they talked about slavery and they really don't glorify slavery. But what they glorify is living in plantation, the yesteryear of the simplicity or aspects that I think we have to talk about them. But in a lot of ways, I've never really examined them before. I have, obviously, in the past few years, but the way you guys did it in the conversation was really good.
And that's why these conversations are so important. And that's why we have to keep having these conversations.
Absolutely.
That's why we have to push back on the laws that are trying to stop us from having these conversations.
Thank you.
Because they want to be able to teach slavery like that. They want to be able to teach, that's the anti-CRT way of teaching slavery, is like, why would they treat slaves bad? Because that would be like, abusing the cattle and abusing the horses. And we love horses. So, that's literally what they want to teach.
I will say, I also love the less sexy talk about zoning and like what we can actually do using these policies that like seem super boring and like, why does it matter? But they actually really do matter about some really important stuff.
After my conversation with Jo, I had the opportunity to be on a Juneteenth panel, and it came up during that as well, when the question that was asked of me is, on the political front, like what are things that we can do to make sure that we have equity in healthcare and health outcomes? And one of the things I talked about after having this great conversation with Jo was the fact that, zoning is not sexy, but there is a reason why they're willing to put this thing in your neighborhood that's going to emit things into your air that you breathe or seep things into your soil and groundwater that you will eventually drink. And they're not putting that somewhere else. Something as simple as zoning really does have an effect on the inequities that we still see in our communities across the country now. Not sexy, but super duper important. So before we go, we like to share a little joy with each other and with our listeners. So, Amanda, let's start with you. Do you want to start us off with your toast to joy?
I would love to. So recently we went to our communities. Every year we have an ice cream social, and it is like exactly what you're picturing, like an old-fashioned ice cream social where we all go downtown and we eat ice cream and like visit the fire trucks that are out. And, you know, we had a movie on our green, and it's a great community event. And so my toast of joy are to our ice cream social. And I love these community events where we all come together, and it was very well attended. Man, were people ready to be like, let's come back as a community and see each other. So my toast of joy was to our ice cream social. All right, Rachel, what about you?
Well, this weekend, one of my neighbors who moved away during COVID, they actually were going to take a few months in Puerto Rico, and it turned into a lot longer than a few months, but they're moved back to the US. But they were in the area visiting, and we got together with some other neighbors former neighbors who've moved out of our neighborhood. And it was just really good to be back together. And we had such a special community. And it was nice to be reminded of that and just our time together. I think, as we all move through the seasons of life, we can long for what we had, but it's also a nice reminder that they're still my friends, even if they don't live across the street or, a couple doors down anymore, and I can still count on them.
Love that.
So that's my social joy, to friendships in our great neighborhood. It's like that line from The Office when Andy is like the last episode, and he was like, I wish there was a way to know you were living in the good old days when they were happening, or something along that lines. But I think we can have a lot of good old days in our lives throughout our life, but it just is kind of important to appreciate what you have when you have it.
Be in the moment.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, you have to be in the moment. So how about you, Jasmine?
I had a lot of good things happen this weekend, but one thing that happened that really stands out to me is my neighborhood had actually it's my community, Lilburn, Georgia. We had our first Pride prom.
Ooh.
And it was, just an opportunity for people to celebrate in an inclusive environment. I attended, but there was a moment during that event that really stands out to me. And that is when someone who was there, she walks up to me and she kind of looks at me and she goes, "Are you Jasmine Clark?" And I said, "Yeah, that's me." And, I was like, "Yeah, don't tell anyone how much fun I'm having." And she was like, "I thought that was you." And she says, "I just want you to know you saved my life."
What?
And I was like, "What?" And she basically said that during the pandemic that she was dealing with unemployment issues. And in Georgia, the unemployment thing was horrible. Like, basically, they closed all the offices because there was a pandemic. But on top of that, they stopped answering the phones. And so this woman, she, for 3 months, was just waiting and nothing. And she could not get a single person on the phone for 3 months. And she said, and then I called you. And immediately you got the ball rolling and you saved me and my family from being homeless. You just allowed us to be able to survive. And she was like, I will never forget that. And, again, I was having a great time, but that moment really stuck out to me because I really hope that what I do, just in life, but also as a state representative, I really want it to be impactful.
Yeah.
I don't know what brought us together at that moment on the dance floor at the same time, but that moment is, it really just reinforces and validates like why I do what I do.
Oh, and can I just say, like what you said you just did, I know elected officials who I will not name by name, but I know for a fact they're known for not getting back to people. They won't respond. They don't care what your issue is. They don't care if you called, if you emailed, if you put a comment on their Facebook page. They will not get back to you because they don't care, right? You cared. And that to me is a huge qualification for elected office.
Yep, absolutely. On that note, thanks so much to everyone for joining us today, and we'll see you again next week on another episode of The Suburban Women Problem.
The Suburban Women Problem was created by Red, Wine, and Blue. Our executive producer is Beverly Batt. Our producer and editor is Amy Thorstensen. Our video producer is Ashley Hufford, and our production coordinator is Drew Amstutz. If you're ready to be part of the Suburban Women Problem, head over to redwine.blue and sign up for our newsletter so you don't miss a thing.